got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. And before I introduce today's guest, Holly Lyman of Wild Tonic, I just want to say you can check out other episodes on the podcast. You know, Holly, I like to have people on and products on that I admire, that I love, like Wild Tonic. I love it. And other past episodes include I had one of the ladies at Truth Bar. I love Truth Bar. I've had Ryan Lee from Rewind Bars. I've had Jim Simon from Jimmy Bars. I've had RX Bar founder Peter Rahal. And all those talk about their journey, but they're also products that I personally love and that I eat or drink or whatever it is. So check out other episodes on InspiredInsider.com. And before I introduce Holly officially, today's episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And we do that by helping you run your podcast. And, you know, Holly, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at a way to give to my best relationships. I've seen no better way to do that in the past over a decade than have them on my podcast. I have the people I admire, the companies I admire on that I can profile them and share their thought leadership with the world. So if you are a company and you've thought of this podcast thing or producing content, we are an easy button. We are a solution. So you can go to rise25.com and check out more. We've been doing it for a long, long time. Today's guest, I'm excited, Holly Lyman, founder of Wild Tonic. She's an artist from Alaska who mastered the ancient art of Jun Kombucha, among other ferments. And she grows many of the ingredients actually on her ranch in Sedona, Arizona. Some of the flavors, my favorite flavor personally, Holly, is Blueberry Basil. Okay. They have mango ginger. They have Blackberry Mint. They also have hard kombucha as well. And so we're going to talk about her journey. And if you go to a grocery store and you see, it just sticks out. The bottle, if you're watching the video and you could see behind that blue bottle, that rich blue bottle, just calls out that you want to just grab it off the shelf and drink it, at least for me. So Holly, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me on the show.
The necklace you're wearing, that I notice is because I, love the Blueberry Basil. That's on the bottle. I would love for you to talk about creating the bottle because that sticks out. That jumps out to me when I was walking in, and actually I was just in Arizona. And so, I'm in Chicago, but I was just in Arizona and I was in AJ's Fine Foods and I grabbed the Wild Tonic Blueberry Basil and it sticks out, that B on the front of the bottle. So what is the significance of that?
Well, so our ferment is made with honey instead of sugar. And so the bee is, of course, so integral to making our product. And so I designed the bottle out of a turn of the century beer bottle. I had a design of a antique bottle and I just fell in love with the shape of it. And so I designed Wild Tonic's bottle to be something that would really capture somebody's imagination when they looked at it. And blue is the color that bees are first attracted to when they go to pollinate flowers. And so
I didn't know that.
I just thought, okay, I'm bringing all these things together in the concept of the drink, and as an artist, I try to pay attention to every detail of how something is perceived. And so the bottle was kind of a fun work of art unto itself. And then the ferment, the Jun Kombucha, that was a whole other process. I just fell in love with fermenting everything and anything I could get my hands on. And I found the Jun culture, and that just became an evolution.
I want to hear about the first things you actually were fermenting, but I do want to say, like, when I started to look into Wild Tonic, I'm like, this bottle is beautiful. And then it made sense, like an artist actually created, it is a piece of art. The bottle is a piece of art. Was it hard to take that vision of what you wanted with the bottle to reality?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely, it was a process because you have to go to the mold makers and source the bottles. Our bottles are now made in the US, which is really a big deal. So we used to source them from China, and we're trying to bring our all of our processes back to the US. And so now they're made here in the US.
So there was a lot that went into that. Is there like a couple different versions of the mold, or how did that work? Because if you look at the bottle, it's just like very intricate.
Yeah, we have for our alcohol kombucha, we have a 750 ml bottle, which is a lot larger, like a wine bottle. And that's a beautiful bottle. It's not sold everywhere. It's a little hard to find, but then we have our 12-ounce bottle and our 16-ounce bottle. So the 12-ounce bottle, we're just getting now ready to sell into Canada.
So talk about the slim can, because that's relatively new.
Yeah. That's brand new. So that's for the hikers, the people who want to take our product and go outdoors with it, or go to a gymnasium. It's very light. It's very environmentally friendly. The other thing that's really cool about the bottles is we take them and we give them to a company in Phoenix called Refresh Glass, and they take the bottles and they turn them into candles and cups. So there's actually, soon we'll be selling those on our website, but it's just a beautiful blue tumbler glass that you can then use day in and day out in your kitchen.
I would totally get that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I didn't even want to throw the bottle out. I mean, recycle it even. I'm like, I need to keep this in some fashion. So it's good that you're kind of going that direction. What was the decision like, evolution of the decision to do the slim can? Because I mean, I don't know if I've seen any other kombucha company, maybe they do, actually do a slim can.
Yeah, I think that was largely because so many of our consumers are outdoor enthusiasts, and we just had to have, our bottles are so heavy. If you want to go hiking, you don't want to carry an extra pound or two with you. If you bring a couple
it's a good
of bottles
workout. It's fine.
Yeah. So that was mainly the reason, but it's been hugely popular. It's also allows our consumers to buy it at a lower price point, because those bottles, as you might imagine, are quite expensive.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm sure. I want to talk about the evolution. Well, I guess we'll start with fermenting. How did you even get into fermenting?
So I started reading a book by Sandor Katz, and it was called The Art of Fermentation. And it just changed my whole reality, because ferments are kind of like a lost art, kind of like the painting that I was doing, which is encaustic painting, which is a lost art. But fermenting is something that used to be so integral to our culture. And once refrigeration was developed, all of a sudden, ferments became much more esoteric and, hard to find. And fermentation, 80% of our immune system is in our guts. And so there's more foreign DNA in our body than there is our own DNA. And it's really critical to constantly give your body good bacteria, and it helps us stay healthy. And so that got me interested in fermenting. So I started fermenting and making ginger beers and milk kefirs, water kefirs, vegetables, you just name it, I was fermenting it. And I made wines and meads and beers, and I came across this very unusual ferment called Jun. And it's an ancient ferment. They say, lore has it originated in Tibet, and it was an elixir for energy and enlightenment for the warriors. And so I thought, okay.
That's why I want to order a 5-gallon keg from you, so I could have the energy of warriors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I just, I fell in love with this particular ferment, and just kept refining it. Hundreds of recipes later, I, came up with a chai pear flavor, and that was my first flavor. And then I started developing the other flavors, Blueberry Basil and the Blackberry Mint, which are now two of our best sellers. And, brought it to market in 2015. I was selling kegs out of the back of my car. It was it's kind of crazy. I had like 7 customers. And then fast forward 5 years later, we're in every state in the country and launching into Canada and working on a deal with Europe even. So it's just like gone crazy. And it's been really my team that's built the company. I really just created the drink. It's really the team that takes it forward every day.
I want to hear about the early days of selling it, but I do want to point out, one of the books I was kind of perusing was by Dr. Perlmutter, which is the brain maker, the power of gut microbes to heal and protect. And he talks about that, how important it is to have that. And essentially, I mean, just talk about a little bit of the health benefits of kombucha for a second.
Sure. Well, so our Jun Kombucha has 42 different strains of bacteria and yeast, and it's a living alcohol. It's a living drink. So because we have a non-alcohol version and an alcohol version, it's a living ferment. And so it basically it has prebiotics in it because of honey. It's probiotics in it. It originates from an organism called a SCOBY, which is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And it's a cellulose culture where all of the yeast and the bacteria live in this organism that they think of it as a hotel. And then when you add the tea and the honey, all of the yeast falls out of this culture and it consumes the sugars, which is the honey, and it transforms it into a beneficial acid for the body, which is very detoxifying and very healthful. And so it's when you watch this dance through a glass jar, because that's how I started fermenting in my kitchen, it's just this magical dance that the yeast and the bacteria, and it's a very symbiotic relationship where they both support each other and create this just magnificent drink. And so and then bottling it was like taming the tiger. It's really tough to take this living drink, put it in a bottle, and not have it hit the ceiling. I mean, some of our first drinks that we sold to customers, they would open a bottle and literally the drink would hit the ceiling. And I had that happen to a lot of my dear friends who were my first guinea pigs, where, happy birthday, I'm sending you a package of kombucha. They open it and they spend like the next 3 hours cleaning their ceiling. So,
wow.
Yeah, and an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I drink kombucha every single day, like I was telling you before we hit record. And I, even for 9 months, was brewing my own kombucha in the kitchen until my wife was like, our kitchen looks like a science experiment. Because anyone who knows, you take the SCOBY and it keeps growing. So then I just kept making more small gallons of kombucha before I had like 3 of them spread across. She's like, you cannot do this any longer. And so now it's easier to obviously buy your bottle than for me to, but I just had fun with it,
Oh, it is. It's super fun. We have a whole nursery full of 300-pound scobies, and it's an adventure to.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the flavors? Because you have some unique flavors.
Yeah, I'm kind of a mad scientist, and I just follow my intuition. I love anything that has to do with herbs or medicinal plants, and I just I have a shelf full of things to pull off and just start experimenting with, and it's trial and error.
Blueberry basil, blackberry mint, mango ginger, there's tropical turmeric, raspberry goji, lavender love. And the funny thing is, you said the chai pear was your first flavor. Yeah. I didn't really discover that until I went to your website, because it's more of a seasonal selection right now.
Yeah, it's a fall flavor. And I also like the idea of combining herbs and fruits. I think that that's just a unique way to make a beverage more interesting. If you think about, cherry Coke, I mean, that's not very interesting to me, but then you throw in something like vanilla and it gets more interesting. And so I don't know, I always look for the angle on how to liven things up. Yeah.
And so you went to visit the person, the Art of Fermentation book. Yeah. What was that
Sandor
like?
Katz. Yeah. So Sandor, we started an email dialogue when I was in Washington State living there. And he said, well, come out and visit. And so I took him up on it, and I met him at this little cafe in the middle of nowhere, backwoods Tennessee. He's like, you're never going to find my place unless you follow me. And that's when I knew it was going to be pretty interesting. And so I met him and followed him through all these back roads, windy roads. And I just thought, where the heck am I going? Completely off grid, no electricity. It was just this little primitive cabin, and it was a fermentation foundation that he's created there, where you go and you learn about fermentation. And
Wow.
so he had all these jars on the wall full of ferments. And I had brought my wild tonic along with me because I thought I'm going to share this with him and see what he has to say about it. And so I opened it up and he tried it and he liked it. And I said, well, what do you think? And he looked at me right in the eyes and he's like, Holly, there are no rules in fermentation. And when he said that, it was almost like it just gave me the permission to treat the fermentation like an art form. And it just allowed me to really push the boundaries. And so I left there just being completely freed up to think about it in a different way. And that's when I started experimenting with the alcohol ferment. I took the non-alcohol and I started just really being the mad scientist around, I want to create a healthy alcohol, something that's an alternative to beer, wines, or ciders. And so I went about creating a whole new category of alcohol, which was the hard Jun Kombucha that we have now on the market. And since then, it's like all of the big players are coming into the market, and we're still a relatively small company, but tremendous growth potential.
Yeah, totally. I mean, sometimes the smaller companies are way more nimble and can make those decisions, do those things that the larger companies can't. I want to hear about the early days, Holly, selling out of the back of your car.
Oh my
When
God.
you first started doing this, were you thinking, I want to start a business of this, or how did that occur?
Well, it was, yeah, I did want to start a business.
You did.
And funny thing is I was looking to hire our first employee, and it was a bookkeeper. And so, of course, having no history, I had traveled to Sedona, fell in love with Sedona and the area here. And so I put an ad out, and she responded, and she met me at a local coffee shop. And this is how small we were. So we're sitting down for our interview, and she called up her husband, and she's like, hey, they're legit. I'm okay. You don't have to worry about them kidnapping me, basically. And so we've gone from that, and also, I did everything from, filling kegs myself to delivering product to sales. I mean, you name it. You wore all the hats because you had to in a small company. And we still have a few of our folks with us that started who are just wonderful people. And, I thought, well, maybe I should hire other people who are from the beer world or from the wine world. But in a way, kombucha is really its own animal. You can't bring in people with a preconceived notion of what it is to make this ferment, because it will just drive them crazy. It's a whole different process.
I think many of the people I've met who like kombucha, who are just like experimenting themselves, it's really about the craft of creating it. And like you said, it's kind of like a little art form. You experiment. I remember my first batch, I was like dropping fresh raspberries in just to see what the flavor would taste like. So I could totally get that mad scientist feel of what you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Your first sales, what did your first sales look like as far as what did you actually offer out there? Like, cause now you're crafting it and now you're like, okay, I'm ready to sell this stuff.
Well, our first customers were really small mom and pop, restaurants and coffee shops. And I remember when we first broke into natural grocers. Natural Grocers was one of our first chains, and it was a big deal. And I almost felt like, oh my gosh, we're going to be exiled from Natural Grocers, because one of their head managers came to work for us early on, and I was like, uh-oh, but we're still being sold by Natural Grocers, and I'm a huge fan of their chain. But it was just a lot of work, a lot of compliance, a lot of, getting all of the paperwork filled in to get into these major chains is almost a full-time job.
Right. I want to talk about a little bit of fulfillment. Like, you get the first big order, it's got to be hard because if you're used to producing a certain amount and then producing more, but backing up a little bit, Holly, were the original ones, was it a farmer market? Were you just calling your friends and they were buying it? What were some of those initial customers?
So the initial customers were local people here in Sedona. And, a lot of them still sell Wild Tonic today, which is really cool. There's places one of our first customers, for example, is here in Old Town Cottonwood, the Red Rooster, and they are a local breakfast and lunch place. And they took a chance on us. Everybody that sold our product in the beginning was really taking a chance on this new company. And so you just got to know the owners, and I frequented a lot of the places where I sold my product and became friends with those
You're like
folks.
ordering, you're like, by the way, I think kombucha would be good on the menu here. And like,
exactly.
oh, that sounds good.
That's how it goes. And, it just evolved from there.
What do they purchase? Do they say, let's start with a 6-pack? I mean, what are some of those initial customers? How much are they buying in the beginning?
They would buy like 2 or 3 cases, and they would keep it in their cold storage, whatever they could fit in their cold storage. Okay. And, we had some good customers in Sedona as well. And then even up in Flagstaff. So, it was very local. Very local. And it also sold Wild Tonic at the farmer's market. So that's how we reached a lot more people, is on the weekends. We don't do that anymore, but, it's also sold at the farmer's market.
It would probably be popular. But what about, do you remember the first big order? And because there's the craft and there's the selling, and now it's like there's a lot of operations involved in the production.
Yeah. Well, we started in a 3,000 square foot brewery, and I started with these turn of the century soup kettles for fermentation vats, and we bought all of the equipment from this little microbrewery in Hood River, Oregon, put it in the back of our trailer, drove it to Sedona, started in this 3,000 square foot space with 2 or 3 people. And it was very, very much a homegrown operation. And then we realized very quickly that the demand was going to quickly outgrow our equipment. So my ex-husband is a physicist, and he and I started masterminding the design of new equipment, and worked with a tank producer and designed a lot of these large tanks and the fermentation equipment needed to make the kombucha. And then we moved into a very large space about 4 blocks away. We bought a building, and that's now the home of Wild Tonic. And we're about 36,000 square feet now. So we kind of grew very quickly, very exponentially. And all of the people on our team, we actually hired tradesmen who were people who were in the construction field, who were who had worked at breweries and installed all the cooling systems necessary. So now we really have a state-of-the-art facility, but it didn't happen overnight. It happened over years. We're 6 years old now, and it's really been a progression and a learning experiment, a lot of trial and error. You learn from your mistakes. It's very costly to basically invest in a business that is where there's no model for. If you think about wine, or you think about beer, or you think about mead, there's books written on those things. Yeah. There's a precedent set on how to do that. With kombucha, it's very secretive. Nobody wants to share what they know because it's such a competitive, cutting edge industry. And so you pretty much have to figure it out yourself. And if you don't, then, you get stuck. And we've had a lot of points in our growth where we've had to take a step back and figure things out.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk about the differences of kombucha, right? And we talked about before you hit record, I think you said you produce 3,000 pounds of honey a year or something like that?
No, way more than that. That's
way more.
Tote weighs. So we're probably one of the largest consumers of honey in the United States, because we order probably $100,000 worth of honey a month. I mean, it's a lot of honey.
Wow.
And it's all organic. We work with one family, because so much honey these days has been tainted. So we're very careful about how we source our honey. I know the family who has had this beekeeping operation for many generations. They're from Brazil, and just a beautiful family. They treat the bees very well because it's all organic. They don't use pesticides when they harvest the honey. And, it's just, it's very carefully sourced. Same with our tea. Our tea is sourced from Bangladesh, and it supports a whole community of women to educate their families. And, the plantation was built on a place that was all desert at one point, and now it's this thriving community. So we're very careful about how we source our ingredients.
I want you to talk a little about the honey versus sugar version, because we were talking about it. But I want to say, I don't know if it was psychological, but I remember when I was drinking the blueberry basil, I was like, I could taste the honey. I don't know if it's because it just looks good on the, it says on the label, made with honey. There's a nice like blue glass blown like bee, and then there's one on the label. I'm like, yes, I could taste the honey. So I don't know if I was tasting it or if it was just like I was seeing the bee and I was tasting it, but I swear I could taste the hints of honey in the kombucha, and it was great. What is the difference? Because most people are like, well, kombucha is kombucha, right? So there's the Jun Kombucha, and then there's made with honey versus sugar. Talk about the honey versus sugar.
So Jun is considered the mother of all kombuchas. The honey is incredibly beneficial to the body. Honey has all kinds of healing qualities. If you Google honey and healing qualities, they've used it since the ancient times as a medicine. And it is assimilated by the body in a way that is much slower than assimilated than sugar. So it's considered a whole food. So the body is actually able to treat it as such. And it doesn't give you the highs that sugar does or the lows that sugar does. It's a very sustainable energy. And it also has the prebiotics in it, amino acids in it. It's incredibly healing for the gut in general and for the body in general. So it's considered the champagne of kombuchas. It's amazing in its flavor profile because it doesn't taste like vinegar. So a lot of people who say, I can't drink kombucha because it tastes awful, they actually love Wild Tonic, and you'll see them sneaking to the grocery store and buying kombucha when they would normally, just avoid it like the plague.
It sounds, totally logical, but it's not an easy decision if you think about, I'm sure honey is much more expensive than pouring sugar into kombucha, right?
Yes. Incredibly. Yeah, it's very expensive to make, and almost, it's, it's the differentiating factor in our drink. And so I would never give it up, but it also makes it incredibly expensive to produce.
Yeah.
So people are getting quality when they buy it.
Yeah, totally. The alcohol side of things. Talk about kind of the evolution of you create, because you didn't start with the alcohol version, right? You start with with non-alcoholic. Yes. At what point did you decide we need to have an alcoholic version?
Well, I got bored. I had to do something new. And so I started fermenting. It's funny. I started actually, how do I increase the alcohol content in Wild Tonic? And so I started experimenting with rice, actually. So I fermented rice and made this ancient rice ferment. And then I just thought, oh my gosh, my brewers are going to kill me because this is too complicated and it's very labor intensive. And how can I simplify this? So I just kept pushing myself to read everything I could on ferments and fermentation, read things I don't even understand. And then somehow it kind of infuses itself into our psyche. And it comes out in ways we don't expect. And even to this day, I don't share my full recipe with my brew team. There's unmarked bags that come into the brewery, and it's X amount of this and X amount of that. And, and I think that secretive mad scientist in me just can't help myself. I love inventing. I love creating. And whether it's a painting or whether it's a drink or cooking dinner, it's all an adventure.
How was it selling the hard kombucha versus the non-alcoholic? Was it any easier or harder?
It's interesting. So in the beginning, we had our alcohol kombucha at Whole Foods Market, and out of 100 beers, we were in the top 5 fastest moving products on the shelf. And so I think that's when the larger companies started taking notice, because there was one other hard kombucha on the market, had been on the market for maybe a decade, before us, but it was a regular kombucha. It wasn't a Jun. The flavor had something to be desired. But when the Jun came on the market and it started moving so quickly at Whole Foods, I think it caught the attention of a lot of the larger beer producers, whether it be Boston Beer, Full Sail Ale. You started seeing a lot of these larger companies, Anheuser-Busch, they all started coming into the hard kombucha space, and now it's quite a thing. And, you know, what do they say, that a rising tide floats all boats, or something like that?
Yeah,
and
you're exactly right. Yeah.
So now you go into a Whole Foods, especially on the West Coast.
Increases awareness
Yeah.
for everyone.
Yeah. And so, you know, there's this whole movement now of hard kombucha, and it's becoming like the next hard seltzer, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that is amazing, actually. And you know, the going in and around do you find that there's bars that are implementing this as well, or is that
Absolutely.
not in restaurants?
Yeah, so we're sold at Emerald's New Orleans Fish House on the Strip in Las Vegas. I mean, we're featured on their menu. We have our own little section. They have beers, wines, and hard kombucha. And, you know, that's exciting when you start getting into some of these more mainstream type restaurants. And, you know, we're sold on tap at a lot of breweries, even take our kombucha and put it on tap because they don't make kombucha. Yeah, so you're starting to see it in a lot of mainstream type places.
Yeah. Holly, I have two last questions. Before I ask them, I just want to thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. And I remember walking out of AJ's drinking the Wild Tonic and being, this is amazing. I took a picture of it. I sent it to your team and I said, this is amazing. I don't know who created this, but I love to have him on the podcast. And so thank you for your team for making that happen. And your team's always super responsive whenever I email them. So I know you have an amazing team behind you. Before I ask the questions, I want to point everyone to go to wildtonic.com, check out their website, check out their flavors. I know wildtonic.com/flavors is everything they have, from the hard tonic, the hard kombucha to the non-alcoholic kombucha. And I'm sure they're at a grocery store near you. Are there any other places how we could point people towards where people can get them? I know you mentioned Whole Foods. What other places can they go and get it?
Sprouts, Farmers Market. So starting in March, April. So March and April, we're going to be mandated in all of the Whole Foods. So you'll be able to find our alcohol there. The non-alc, I would just go to our website. We have a Find Us tab. So depending on what state it is, you'll find the chain that the Wild Tonic is available in. That's the easiest way to find it. But we're at Safeway. We're at some of the conventional chains are starting to take our product on and do very well with it.
That's amazing. Last two questions. Okay. I want to hear about the toughest. What's been some of the tough part of the journey? And then on the flip side, what's been a proud moment for you? Start with the tough. What's been like a challenging part of this journey besides every day? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, this last year has been really difficult because of COVID. You know, all the grocery stores, they want to keep water and toilet paper on the shelves. They're not interested in the latest beverages that are out there. And so, you know, we've definitely maintained our equilibrium. Our sales have remained steady, but we haven't had the growth that we've had in past years. But now all this pent up growth is kind of is there now for setting into the spring. So I think first quarter is going to be phenomenal. And, you know, I think this last year of COVID was really tough because we had to deal with supply chain issues. We had to deal with all of that, compound it with, you know, me getting a divorce. And that's been very tough on not just myself, but the company. And, you know, I think that's been a huge challenge. But, you know, knock on wood, there's no attorneys involved and, you know, it's all going very well. It's just, you know, you devote 16 years of your life to somebody and, you know, you make them the front and center of your life. And then all of a sudden they leave and you have to, you know, reinvent yourself. You have to reinvent your tribe. And, you know, I'm very thankful for the friends in my life now that are here because I'm realizing the importance of not just focusing on one person. It's important to have a tribe of people around, of friends, of people that you love and that are like family that maybe aren't family.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, this has been a tough year, I think, for everyone, and from personally and professionally. And I appreciate you sharing that, because when people share that type of stuff and getting the support from their friends and family, it allows other people to share that stuff with others too, and open up. And really, when we do that, we open ourselves up to support from the community and other people. So I appreciate you sharing that. On the flip side, what's been some proud moments for you?
So I think probably in the very first few years of Wild Tonic, the LA Dodgers started drinking Wild Tonic, and they loved it so much that they flew somebody from our brewery across country to New York to bring a bunch of our product to one of their games. And
That's
the
amazing.
performance coach for the LA Dodgers is a big fan, and he wrote this beautiful letter of recommendation for Wild Tonic because they have it on tap there for their players to drink on a day-to-day basis. And even though we can't afford to be an official sponsor, we're like the underground drink that they go to. And I think they just won the World Series, which is a big deal. And, it
was all because of Wild Tonic. No, I'm just kidding. If you want to win the World Series, you should have Wild Tonic on tap in your clubhouse. No.
Yeah. And then,
do you see other teams picking that trend, or
actually, the Utah Jazz coach reached out to us and for basketball, and I know that there's been others, but I think LA Dodgers is probably the biggest, and and then also a lot of singers seem to be into Wild Tonic. So one day out of the blue, I get this email from the president of the singer Jewel. And he's like, Jewel's a big fan of your drink. And so she and I have now become good friends because we both have that background of being born and raised in Alaska. For me, I have a third generation Alaskan, and her parents homesteaded there as well. We have so much in common, and she's just a delightful spirit.
You know what? I just want to be the first one to thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the product you create. Everyone should check out wildtonic.com. Check out more episodes of the podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, you, Jeremy. Holly. Thanks so much.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.